Action.
I'm James LaFond. I've been told to say please subscribe to Hobo History because it's hard being a hobo out here. And we appreciate your support. Thank you. I tried not to smile. The Roanoke Settlement. Okay. Most of the stuff that's been written about it, people just didn't do the research they needed to do. There's a lady named Lee Smith. I believe she's an English lady that did a wonderful book on it. And I've expanded on some of what she did, but not on the fate of the Roanoke settlement. She settles it. I mean, it's not simple. It's more complicated than people want to believe, and the reason why other historians and writers have not been able to figure it out is because they think that English-speaking North America before the American Revolution is something other than what it was. So they don't have the proper reference points. They don't understand it. So the Roanoke settlement was never intended to land on Roanoke. It was unsustainable. They didn't have a good water source there. They were frightfully close to the Spanish, who had just wiped out 20 years early, had annihilated a French settlement not that far south from there, and had actually settled almost up to Roanoke, even had tried to settle a mission in Chesapeake Bay in the 1500s. So the Jamestown settlers, 20 years after Roanoke, were paranoid that the Spanish were going to come up to Chesapeake Bay and kill them. I mean, they were terrified of that. So what was the deal with Roanoke? Sir Walter Raleigh had the deed. He was the darling of the Queen. England was a country that was run by a queen, and it worked very well and very aggressively because the richest, smartest, and most ruthless men were one and the same. They were the sea dogs. They were essentially pirate captains that would sail around, raiding ships and stuff, and come back and bring her slaves and gold. And they were all competing, really, for her favor. They all ultimately wanted to marry her and become king, and she played them all off against each other. She's a brilliant woman, and supposedly died a virgin. So Sir Walter Raleigh was her favorite, which means the other three most powerful men in England hated his guts. These guys were nuts. One guy jumped on a buck, deer, and rode it to the door of her makeup room, and then stabbed the thing in the heart with his sword while he was on his back and killed it and said, "This is how much I love you." Okay, so these dudes went to war for her, okay? They did. Yeah, they beat the crap out of the Spanish many times. A lot of Spanish people died because dudes wanted to marry this chick, right? Because they wanted to be king. So Sir Walter Raleigh has the second baddest dude in England as his right-hand man, as Sir Richard Grenville, probably the best warrior in England at the time. The second best warrior, but highest status warrior, was Drake, Francis Drake. Francis Drake came to prominence after a battle in 1566 against the Spanish off of Veracruz, in which his ship saved the day. And Captain John Hawkins, who had been his boss and the old favorite, Drake saved his butt, but they had to drop off 100 guys at the mouth of the Rio Grande at Matamoros in Brownsville, or what became that. And when they came back, Drake took credit for saving the expedition, and he became the number one of the Queen, okay? So Riley's like number two, and he's kind of a sissy boy, and Grenville's like his right-hand man, and he's tougher than Drake. A lot of jealousy there. Grenville was made to sit out the battle of the Spanish Armada. The English knew absolutely, without a doubt, that they were going to destroy the Spanish Armada. The Spaniards had no chance. There was no objective way you could look at it that they ever had a chance. Ship to ship, the Brits always beat them. It was just ridiculous. They knew that they were going to beat them so badly that there was a fight over who got to do it. Richard Grenville was made to sit with his 51-ship fleet in Bristol Harbor and sit out the Battle of the Spanish Armada because these dudes didn't want him to be able to show off in front of the Queen. Okay. And that ties in with Roanoke. Why? Because Grenville was in charge of seeding the Roanoke colony. And he was the admiral of the expedition, if you will. He's in charge of dropping these people off and resupplying them. Drake even tried to resupply them because they were English after all. Okay. Working for Grenville is a Portuguese navigator, okay, that is in the pay of Grenville's enemies in England and is also in the pay of the Spanish. So this dude's a gangster. He manages to have the colony, the Roanoke colony, which are all these religious separatists, these Protestants. The governor, his name was John White. He was an artist. He made beautiful sketches. Okay, really nice guy. Eventually, enemies of Riley and Grenville probably had him killed because he kept on trying to find out what happened to the colony. They were supposed to land in the Chesapeake Bay. Everybody, the Spanish 100 years earlier were calling it the Bay of the Mother of God. Okay, the Norse knew about it. Everybody knew about the Chesapeake Bay. It is the basically the nursery of the whole Atlantic Ocean at the time. Descriptions of the Chesapeake Bay given by John Smith are astounding. You can see to the bottom, and you can't stick your hand down there without hitting a fish, without something swimming around. Okay, it was just crazy. It was something that people couldn't imagine today. That's where they were headed. The Portuguese mariner marooned them there. After dropping off a soldier who was named Darby Glen, he was an Irish dude, who had been captured and enslaved by Richard Grenville twice, escaped once, went to work for the French, for a French pirate captain, got captured by Grenville's people in a tavern after he finished that in London, and they pressed him in service again as a soldier. He defects to the Spanish and tells the Spanish about there's going to be a colony on Roanoke. The Spanish are like, no idiot would build a colony there, especially not the English. They're better at this than we are. No, they dumped them off there, okay, because it was unsustainable. If Riley could not sustain a colony, okay, for I forget how many years it was a deal, he would lose his deed to Virginia. You're talking about 7 of the United States. That's how big his personal deed was. He loses it if the colony fails. And who gets it? The other dudes that paid the Portuguese guy. Okay. So the first colony that sets down there is just a military expedition. And it's run by a guy named Lane, who's a psychopath, who spent about a decade murdering Irish people in Ireland. And then he got a job as the captain of this expedition. They made alliances with the Indians, and then Lane started attacking them, killing them, he said he was going to try to convert them to Christianity or something, which was not a direct aim of the expedition. It was supposed to serve as a platform for preachers to then minister to these people. They weren't going to convert these people by the sword. They knew better than that. What he was doing was landing during a drought on an island with bad water supply to begin with. Then he took the Indians' crops during a drought, caused a war with them, wiped out a bunch of these Indians, made enemies of them. And then he left, and he left 10 guys there to hold the fort. And they were like, oh, no, forget this. They're coming back. So they got in a boat, like a ship's boat. Like we'd put a little putt-putt engine on now, and they rowed that thing back to England. Okay, these guys were desperate. Darby Glen was one of those guys. So in the next expedition with the Portuguese mariner, Darby Glen defects for him, tells the Spanish, the fix is in, the Portuguese mariner drops them off from Roanoke Island. One of them gets murdered. John White leaves with a ship that comes by to try to get more help for the colony, to try to get resupplies, because the Indians aren't being cooperative, as he was told they would be. Okay. No fake, they weren't being cooperative. Lane was there 2 years before murdering them. Okay, so what ends up happening to the Roanoke colony is they say, gone to Croatoan. Okay, uh, they were dispersed, mostly as slaves, among the Native Americans. In the English-speaking, what became the English-speaking states of the United States, they were literally the first slaves, and they were owned by American Indians. And they were specifically enslaved to work as copper artisans and copper miners in a rich copper deposit not far from where Georgia and South Carolina meet. And there was gold up there too, but I don't know if they were mining that. And two of these guys made it all the way to the Blue Ridge Mountains, carved their name in a tree. Some of their ancestors survived as Tuscarora Indians who spoke. They were ready to wipe this one minister's group out when they landed, and then the minister forgot his Latin when he started to pray to God, and he started praying in Welsh. And then one of the Tuscaroreans said, "My daddy was a Welshman," in Welsh. I was like, "Hey, how you doing?" So they find them all over the place. They end up there was one particularly vicious tribe that controlled trade because they owned an island right where Riley is in North Carolina now. Okay, so I guess there's a bridge going over there now, but there used to be an island there with an Indian fort on it. The Indians had walled forts. They did it before, settlers did it. And they controlled trade there, and apparently they enslaved 14 of these people. And, of course, a lot of the women would have, after an initial period of enslavement, Indians in the eastern United States didn't believe in rape. They would have been married as wives, and their children would have been full-status Indians. If any of the men showed any martial aptitude, which would have been unlikely because they were religious separatists, then they might have become full men in the tribe. But it's unlikely. The men probably ended their days as slaves because they were Christians, and they weren't fighting men. John Smith was tasked with, the mission is to find survivors of the Roanoke colony and establish a new colony in Her Majesty's plantation of Virginia. And one of his explicit jobs is to look for survivors of the Roanoke colony. He wrote in his journal back to the Virginia Company, who he worked for, who paid him to write what he wrote, that there are no survivors of the colony. But he also wrote in his private diary that there are English-style houses on the Potomac. They look just like the houses in England that somebody built and new carpentry and practiced it just like we do. And he particularly ran into one blonde-haired boy that was walking by a river one day when he was going by on one of his expeditions. But that wasn't there for public consumption because Sir Walter Riley had to die. Or at least he got a nice brand of cigarettes named after him at some point. My daddy used to smoke them. He ended up getting locked in the Tower of London and beheaded. He lost big. Okay, so this is imagine a world where 4 or 5 Donald Trumps are vying for the hand of the Queen, and all their competing schemes and everything. How these guys would do each other, how they'd screw each other over. Richard Grenville was disgraced. His ward was killed. He was not permitted to fight against the Spanish Armada. He took 6 ships out, looking for the whole Spanish fleet, okay? Because that wasn't the end of Spain. The Spanish Armada wasn't the end of them. And he found them. I think it was a rather large fleet. It was like 30 ships or something. And he asked the men on his flagship if they were willing to stay and fight to the death, and they said yes, and he sent the other 5 ships away. And the other 5 ships actually watched the battle from afar because the Spanish were such shitty sailors and their ships were so crappy. They didn't have good sources of timber. The English had the good North American timber. That they weren't using tropical junk, and the Spaniards already wiped out their own forests except for the oaks that they used for acorns for the pigs. And for cork is like this inner oak bark. So these 5 British ships stood off and they watched the battle. And he fought in full armor on the deck. The battle lasted for days. Eventually a bunch of Spanish soldiers dragged him off the ship. So he probably either died of his injuries or died at the hands of the Spanish Inquisition. Okay. John White, whose daughter, son-in-law, and grandchild became Indians, most likely. He agitated for another expedition. He got captured by French pirates. Okay. He somehow got out of that. He agitated for another expedition. He wrote a letter to the smartest men in England at the time, and he disappears from the historical record. Probably at the hands of the same people who paid the Portuguese mariner. Oh, and the 100 guys that Drake dropped off at the mouth of the Rio Grande, they walked to Cape Breton, Canada. Okay. Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, the Carolinas, Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Jersey, New York, New England, Maine, up to Canada. Only 3 of them made it. Apparently, none of them died. Most of them at some point, ran into the Land O'Lakes butter girl and stayed. Okay, so 97 of those guys had a happy ending. The other 3 guys, I think 2 of them got jammed back into the British Navy, which was just a hellish experience. And the other one, who remembered some of the English languages and dances, they made him dress up like an Indian and dance around in front of the admirals and chant the language in front of scientists so they could try to write it down. That's pretty much what I mean. How many minutes? 24. 16. Okay.